All right, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us in this new venture of online workshops. Just so you know, I am going to be recording this evening, so this will be available online after we get done here tonight. I will let you also know that I also am recording from my home and I had some headphone troubles, so you might hear my family in the background. So just letting you know. I think almost everyone has their mics muted, but if you join us, please be sure to just keep your mics muted. And then you can also use if you see on the little bar at the bottom, there is a little chat icon. You can use that and you can type me questions and I will try to answer them. I have that window open as well. So we're going to get started. That's kind of the logistics housekeeping items. So tonight we're going to be talking about designing a creative resume and some of the things that you should be thinking about, what you should do. And we're going to look at a lot of different examples because I think that's one of the best ways to get an understanding for what works, what doesn't work, and what the options are out there. So let's see. Yep. So real quick, I am Liz Julian. I am a career counselor here at Stout. Career Services is open. We will do phone meetings with you during this time. We will do virtual meetings just like this, but with only one person. So I have my contact information up on the screen. My email is pretty straightforward, Julian L at UW-Stout. And also calling that number, the 1601 number, you can then schedule an appointment. It's kind of the easiest way versus us going back and forth over email. So tonight we're going to cover those basics. I touched on those. We're going to talk a little bit about typography. It's not very often I get to talk about typography with students when I talk about resumes. So yay. And then we're going to kind of put it all together and look at some examples and see what works, what doesn't work. So start with the basics. What is a resume? What is the point of this? It is one page almost always. There are occasionally exceptions, but for most people in watching this presentation, it's probably going to be one page. It is a summary because you can't fit everything on one page. It's a summary of who you are as a professional, and the goal is not to get you the job, it's to get you the interview. I know very few people who have actually just walked in, handed in a resume, and got a job from that. They get an interview. You have to do that part. So it's important, but it's not the entirety of your application trying to get a job experience. Just step one. I ask usually how long people will actually look at resumes when they see it for the first time. And the answer is very, very short. Most of the time, it's somewhere between 7 to 14 seconds. And I will tell you the last position that I actually hired for, we had 127 applicants in the end, which is a pretty average number. It was right there in the middle. And it was a very small organization and we did not have a computer system to help us. So we had to manually sort through those one by one. And the first time we went through those 127 resumes, you bet it was very quick. So you're making a snap decision on, yes, do they have the basic skills that I need? So that's another incentive to keep it to one page. If I'm making those decisions so fast, I have to remember to think about that part. Now on the second look, so we started with those 127 and we moved it down to maybe 20 that were like, yes, they basically meet what we're looking for, and a couple maybes we'll look later. We would go back through and then read in depth. So it definitely does need to be perfect spelling. Everything needs to be accurate, easy to understand. But from first glance, it's really fast. And then we read them in depth. So if you don't have a resume first, this is sort of the steps you want to take through. Collect your work history. I kind of keep a document that is many, many pages long, but it's my entire work history. Not all of it shows up on a resume anymore. A lot of it doesn't, but I do that so I have it. Sometimes I'm playing with things, sometimes I'm swapping things out, but I have it somewhere. So start by collecting your history. I always like to write a job or a resume to an exact job, either because I'm applying for it or just getting in the mindset of this is the type of job I want helps me write it. So try to find a position that you're interested in maybe applying for. That'll give you a little bit to focus on. And then you're actually going to go through, write your resume sections. I always do the content first, and then I go and work on the design. So the looks of it. What do I have to get onto this page that'll help me design it? And then you, just like any sort of design project, you're reviewing, you're refining, you're updating, you're improving as you go as many times as you need. So this is basically it. Like the one on the before, this is the basic content, your standard sort of format. And the after is how you want it to look. This is sort of your first piece as a designer. And so before they even see your portfolio, they're probably seeing your resume. So it really counts. It can leave a good or bad impression. So the design matters, but also the overall goal, again, is to get you that resume. So that content, how you're selling your experience, that is also incredibly important. So not sure where everyone is with their resumes. If you haven't updated one since high school, or you didn't even have to make one in high school, or you did it for an on-campus job and haven't touched it since, or mid-program review. So parts of the resume, super basic, but that's where we're going to start. I like to think everything boils down to these three sections. So your contact information, because I have to be able to find you, your education, usually your number one qualifier at this point in time because you're in school currently. And then your everything else, I like to argue, is your experience. In one way, shape, or form, it's pointing to I can do the job you're looking to hire for. So contact information, fairly straightforward most of the time. You can design it as much as you want or as little as you want, but at bare minimum, I have to have your name, I have to have your email, and I have to have a phone number. Now you can use your Stout email, you can use your personal one, not a strong preference one way or the other. As long as it looks professional, your name, your initials, not a weird nickname that you got when you signed up for email at 13, probably not the email you want to use. But as long as it's straightforward, your name, that's okay. You can use your Stout one. I know alumni who continue to use their Stout for a number of years. They keep on checking it. That's the goal. Can I answer an email? Same sort of thing with your phone number. Just choose one phone number, not a huge issue anymore, but just choose one and make sure your voicemail's empty, you have a voicemail set up, and actually check it, because this is how they're going to get in contact with you. I get asked not infrequently about the address. You're not getting anything really by mail almost ever. There are exceptions. I used to live in very rural North Carolina. I got things by mail when I was searching for jobs. It was very strange. But you can use your school address, you can use your home address. Sometimes people just leave it off or just put the city, state. That's okay too. There sometimes is an incentive if you're moving back home and you want to say like, hey, I'm going to be here. You might want to use your parents' address. If you're staying in Menominee, you could use your Menominee address. But usually people who hire college students get it. You kind of are having two addresses. So that's something that is a good thing to talk over with your career counselor, which almost always is going to be me if you are in the School of Art and Design, because we can help you make a decision there. It's not a hard and fast rule, just what are the pros and cons of doing each one. But otherwise, oh, the other thing here, people will include a link to their portfolio. So you can see the top one doesn't have that, but the bottom one does. And maybe Sean has it elsewhere on his resume. I don't know. But that's something you might also want to include. So your next section after that is probably going to be education, because again, it's probably your number one qualifier at this point in time. So really all you have to do is only where you receive a degree, and then you're going to write out the full name of the degree you're getting. So industrial, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in industrial design. This example just abbreviates it to BAs, MAs, MFA. That's okay too. But then the full school name, especially for UW-Stout, as I just said it, abbreviated. There's another UW out there. There's Washington or West Virginia, maybe. They have a UWV. But write out the full name so people know. Include the city, state, and the dates you attended. If you're going to be graduating, you could say anticipated graduation, May 2020. You can include your GPA if it's above a 3.0. Most of my art fields, the employers you're looking at, are not super concerned with the GPA. Occasionally, if you're working at something like 3M, where they are large, they're very corporate, they're very industry-based, they might have a GPA kind of requirement given to them, but you don't see it too often. If it's above a 3.0, you certainly can include it. If it's below a 3.0, don't worry about it, leave it off. It's probably never going to be an issue. Okay. Oh, and the other thing about education, start with the most recent, work backwards through time. So if you transferred in, it would be second on your resume. If you list your high school still, if you just don't have much on your resume, this is your first resume, you'll have that after Stout. So Stout right now should be at the top for everyone. Then, like I said, most everything else I count as experience. The biggest one usually being work. So you're trying to convince someone I can do the job because I have some work history. That can be tricky when you don't have that work history yet, but we'll talk about that. The basic format is what this example shows. I need to know what the job was, the dates, ideally.
Unknown participant is now joining.
Sorry, let me make sure everyone's muted here. There we go. Okay. So where was I? Okay, so you see where it says San Mateo? Ideally, I would know the city and state for both of these. Now, the freelance work, obviously, that's different because that could be for a lot of people in different locations. But I need to know the where it was at, what your role was, the dates, and then I need to know a little bit about what you were doing, okay? And just like education, you start with the most recent and then work backwards through time. And we'll talk about these a lot because this is really the most important part of your resume. That's where when we're reading it for that second time, we're going in depth and really seeing what your experiences are. Let's see. So writing your descriptions, you may not have that freelance work that example showed, and that's okay. Most of us start out with jobs that we got in high school. My first job was scooping ice cream. So if I was writing a resume right after, and in high school, that's what I would have worked with. I see food service a lot from people. So starting with writing those bullets underneath that job, waited on tables. It's a very basic starting. So it doesn't go in depth, it doesn't tell me more, but it's not wrong, it's not false, it's not hurting me, but it's probably not helping me unless I am applying for a job waiting on tables. It's go C, average bullet. So to take it to the next level, I like to take a step back. What are we actually doing when we wait on tables? What are we actually doing when we help stock shelves? We're providing customer service, we're working with people, we're handling money, we're working on a team. All those sort of things go into waiting on tables. So you want to take a step back and then talk about those things. So demonstrated verbal communication skills by waiting on tables. Now I explicitly have it on my resume, and that's something that any sort of employer wants. They want you to have communication skills. So now you have that. Sort of the task becomes secondary, so you can emphasize those big picture things. And that's kind of a B plus. I don't love demonstrated. It's not my favorite verb out there, but it is an option, and it's stronger because now it says verbal communication skills. Sort of take it to the next level. If you have the space to work with, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, just tell me more. Assume I know nothing about the job you're doing and describe it to me. So greeted customers, placed orders, and managed money while continually communicating with patrons, kitchen staffs, and managers. So now I have customer service on there. I have some handling of money. I still have those communication skills. I have some implied teamwork, some implied organization, a lot of different things. And I've never even talked about waiting tables. I've said so much more about my skills that might apply to a lot of different places. This is A plus, and you might not always have the space to do that, but if you do, you might as well tell me. Don't assume I know what you're doing. Just another example of doing that. Anytime you can add numbers onto your resume, that's a nice thing. Some of us don't work in fields where you handle a lot of money or hard numbers, but you can always think through, how often do I see people? How often do I do something? All those sort of things are what you can talk about. So this is the same bullet, just rewritten. Both are good, totally acceptable, but greeted customers and managed between 5 to 9 tables an hour. Now I got a little bit of an idea of what your workload was like in that role. Instead of having 1 table an hour, it was really small. It was just carry out. I have some better idea. I also explicitly say reconciled cash and credit cards. So another example of that, so completed first editing, pass on articles. Again, I don't really know what edit goes into editing, maybe. I'm not hiring an editor, so this probably doesn't help you a ton. But if you can tell me what you actually did and think about the big things too and explain those, give me those numbers, you're telling a better story. So reviewed and evaluated 10 to 15 articles per week and made the decision to pass articles. That's great, because if I need you to make a lot of decisions, you probably have some skills in that area because you were making decisions on articles and you were doing a lot. That sounds like a lot to me. That seems like a pretty heavy load. You probably have some experience giving some critical, constructive feedback if you were returning articles to authors. And then another one, you can do this with other experiences. These first few were all job examples, but they don't have to be job examples. So for example, if you're really involved on campus, and if you're responsible for chairing the student event promotional committee, I don't know what that is. If I'm a recruiter, I could be like, that's just a title, or maybe you did a lot. But if you don't tell me, I don't know that. So if you have the space and you have some sort of leadership role where you've done a lot of work, tell them. Don't leave them guessing. So chaired promotional committee of 4, I have some teamwork on there. Presented marketing plans, maybe there's a technical skill that I need you to have, to an audience of 15 to 25 students weekly. That's a lot. That's presenting to a medium-sized group. That's not nothing. But if you just told me your title, maybe I didn't know that you actually did all this. So tell people, they need to know it. The other thing I see a lot for designers is some sort of explanation section where you go over what technical skills, what software skills you have. I've put up a couple different examples. I have issues sometimes with all of these, but there's a lot of different ways to handle it is what I go for with this graphic. This is just kind of weird with the percentage, like how much knowledge of what, who's quantifying that. Also, you have to keep up to date your logos, and I find that probably is going to be challenging. I like this one a little bit more, but it has the same issue. Like, I know 90% of WordPress, it just doesn't explicitly say it, but it looks nice. And I've also seen people who divide it out by the type of thing that they're working on. So, you know, they don't give you how much they know something. They just say that they know it. I get asked, should I put it on there? I kind of know it. Don't put anything on your resume that you're not comfortable getting asked about in an interview. If you barely know it and you're going to stumble through talking about it, don't put it on there. Now, if you can have some sort of conversation, I'm still learning SolidWorks. I'm starting to get really into it, but this is what I have done in SolidWorks. That's okay. But if you're like, I used it once, that's probably not good enough to go on your resume. Make sense? Some other sections you might see out there, you're never going to put everything on your resume, but it really becomes what you need to communicate, what your experience is and what you need to share. Two things I see a lot from people when they're just starting out is basically a related coursework, and then a design project experience. There's a lot of different names you could call the section. And what that section allows you to do is, if you haven't had an internship yet, maybe you can put a project that you really excelled at, you really have a lot to talk about, you can put it on your resume and say game design experience. And then you name the class, you name the year, you format it just like a job. And you're not fooling anyone. It's clear that it's not, but that's a way you can get some more experience. And I'm pretty sure I have an example up ahead here in some of my example resumes. Do you have any questions so far? You can type in the chat if you do. Seems like a good stopping point, pausing point. Okay. So, typography basics. For those of you who did not really geek out in college over this sort of thing, the basics. Serif versus sans serif. If they have feet, it is a serif. If it does not, it's a sans serif. The general rule of thumb is more than 2 is going to start looking crazy. So you can use different fonts. You can use 2 different ones on a resume, but more than that, it might just be too much. That doesn't include bolding and italics, things like that. Just straight up, this is the font I'm using. Don't do this. It's not good for a lot of different reasons. Just 2. I like putting this up. I put this up in all of my presentations. These are good, safe ones. And I say safe in that a lot of people have them on their computer. You don't have to go out and buy a fancy font just for this. If you want to, go ahead, but you don't have to. I've checked off the ones that my Stout issued standard HP laptop has on it. So I've got some pretty decent choices. I'm a big fan of Baskerville. And your Mac might have something different, but these are all on both sides are very common. Some other things to think about, your line spacing. If you get it too close together, you're trying to fit in more words, it can feel too tight, too congested. Don't do that. You don't also want it, if you need to space things out, you don't want it so spaced out it looks like you're trying to fill a page like a paper that you don't have enough words for. So somewhere in between where it's nice to read, but not problematic. If you get really nerdy about it, you can start adjusting the spaces in between your letters, kerning, and keeping things tight, but not so tight that they're overlapping, especially on that headline at the top where it's your name. That's where you're most likely to notice it, when those big letters, those big headlines. So keep an eye out for those as well. The other thing that drives me crazy, if you ever come in and get your resume reviewed, is the single line widows down at the bottom. And this drives me crazy, one, because I took a lot of design classes, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. But it also drives me crazy because you have limited space to work with. And so if this was only a 2-line, you're trying to write a line of a bullet underneath a job description, and you've gone on to the second line here, look at all this wasted space. We don't have a ton to work with. So usually I ask people, okay, we either need to rewrite it so it fits on 1 line, or tell me more, make those 2 lines worth it, because you're already down there. Orphan doesn't really happen often, naturally. So some last suggestions when you're putting together a resume about, font size. Sorry, I see a question here. Thank you, Jaden. Font size. I was going to get to that. You can go as small as 10 point. I think 12 point, particularly if somebody was using Times New Roman, looks way too much like a term paper. But I don't think anyone on this is going to be probably using Times New Roman. Plus, you know a whole bunch of other fonts you can use that look nice. So somewhere between 10 and 12, 11 usually looks nice in everything. I've only seen 10 look too small once. It was kind of a weird font, but I did have someone send me a 7.5 font size recently. I was like, nope, 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 we've got to reevaluate this. It doesn't work. Going down to 10 is one way to get you a little bit more space if you're running out of it. The other sort of trick is to adjust the margins of your document. Usually in Word, most of you are not going to design in Word, but this is the example. The margins are set up to be an inch around the page. When you set up your document in InDesign, if that's what you're using, or Illustrator, or if you do it in Word, you can make them half an inch around the page, and that'll give you a little bit more to work with. Okay, so those are the two tricks on getting some more space. And other things just to keep in mind when I say know the standards for your job. Graphic designers, you're over here, like you have to nail this because you're graphic designers. It is literally your first portfolio piece. The rest of the art and design majors, it is still part of it, but not as much as the graphic designers. Sorry, I'm putting a lot of pressure on y'all. But you still have to care about it more than my construction majors, let's just say that. So know what is expected in your job. The software thing, you need to know that. So the more you get to see resumes, asked to sit in on hiring, it really can help you get an idea for what works, what doesn't work, and what you need to do. Okay? Unless they ask for it in a different format, send it as a PDF. You put a lot of work into making this look nice. So make sure it looks the way you want to look and then send it off. Occasionally you'll find someone who wants it in a Word file, and it kind of kills me a little bit because I don't know how it's going to look when they get it. I can just hope and pray and send it off. And then lastly, just like I mentioned at the beginning, make sure someone's looked it over at least 3 times. You don't catch the errors that are on your materials as easily as someone else can. I have typos on my stuff all the time, which is a little embarrassing. I'm a little ashamed of this, but I'm really good at catching other people's stuff, and that's just how your brain works. You can't quite process your own materials. It works too fast. You have to actually see something new because it slows you down. So bring it to career services, trade with a friend, ask a supervisor, ask a professor, ask a mentor, just ask someone to look it over. The more feedback you get, the better it will look too in the end. The other thing with feedback though, let me give that caveat. There are things that are hard and fast rules with resumes. They are few and far between. A page isn't even technically a hard and fast rule. Your name is a hard and fast rule. There's things that are very much personal preferences way over here. So I once had a student turn in for an assignment, a resume, and he said his objective was world domination. And I said, you cannot put that on a resume. He said, my boss said he loves a joke on a resume. So I put a joke on my resume. Don't do that. I said, great, you can, if you apply for another job with this gentleman, put a joke on there, but jokes don't typically land for most people. That's a personal preference. You know that that person cares about that one thing. And then there's a lot of things in between. Things that the more you hear, you're like, okay, this is sort of the best practice to do this. So just kind of keep that in mind, that feedback, that knowing the standards will help you decipher personal preference, must do. Okay, so I have some examples here. And as I mentioned, like seeing resumes helps so much. And that's kind of how I got started as a career counselor. I started getting on hiring committees for a variety of places I worked with, learned a ton. So it doesn't work quite as well in this digital format, but I have a couple of different examples here, and so the Rachel's on maybe the left. The left, I love this resume. It's easy to read. It's straightforward. The experience section does get a little long. There's not much breaking it up, but overall, it's really easy for a stranger to read it. I have redacted some personal information here. The expertise, she didn't go into her software, but focused kind of on software a little bit and then sort of some big picture skills. That's one way I see people do. She also included her Skype. That was a little unusual. But overall, it breaks it up well. It's easy to read. It's straightforward to the point. It's a good resume. It does the job. And also, you can look at this and know what sort of, and this is more in the apparel design area, but what sort of designer she is. Jennifer's over here has a couple different issues. Color's not a problem, so it's not the color. But really that senior apparel section is just so long. You're never going to read that many bullets, and you don't have to include every single thing about a job, just the most important things. And she probably did a lot of those things in some of those other positions, and she could have broken that up if she really wanted to make sure all of those were there. Just got to think through, like, people are going to zone out at about 8 bullets. It's where you're like, okay, I get it. This is what you did. So breaking those up. You can see some of those widows over on her resume. You can also see the alignment is particularly strange. So make sure your bullets, they should line up all the same. And the other thing down here, references and portfolio available upon request. So she has her portfolio right here at the top. So that's a redundant line. And employers know that if they want to call your office or call your references and they don't have them yet, they will call. You'll get them. So it's just a line. It seems silly, but you don't need to do that line. It can be scratched off. Okay. Let's see. So a couple other examples in terms of formatting. This Kelsey's over here. You know, she's trying to include a lot. There's a lot here. I think it needs a little bit of room to breathe, for one. Like study abroad stipend. Just tell me you went and studied abroad. She doesn't actually even mention the study abroad. She just has the stipend. So definitely think about what you're communicating to people. What's the most important? Again, there's a widow over here. Clearly, I got into circling those. Yes, so that's it. There's some things that I definitely would work on if we came in. Then over here, just thinking through, there's some minor spacing things. I like Rachel's overall. There's another way of showing those skills. And this is a Stout grad. But there's a widow, there's a space. Like, I don't quite understand why there is a space here. Is this the skills and this is attributes? I think that's what this is going for, but it doesn't, it's two sections merged together. Also, thinking about keeping like things with like. So Minneapolis, Minnesota is here. The May's up here, but then the date's here. And then over here's Edina, same sort of thing. I honestly would copy this one and I'd push all cities and location and years to the bottom, just for that consistency's sake, helping someone find what they're looking for quickly. Okay. And then over here, so the first few all kind of kept with a more standard format to the resume. They're not doing anything unusual, but you still get a sense of who they are as designers, and that's okay. I do have students who really want to just blow up the format. If that's who you are as a designer, I'm not going to tell you no, because one, that's not my business. But it has to be who you are as a designer. So this one on the left, I bet this says a lot about who she is as an artist. And that's okay. That if it works for her, it works for her. But there are, I think, some things where she could maybe talk a little bit more about what she's actually doing. Right now, it's very ticking down a list. Even this down here, she says a lot more about what she's doing. And I think that works better for me than reading this, especially when they're not lined up. So I just feel like this, maybe we need to work on some of this, but I wouldn't say, no, you can't do this. Overall, I like the looks of it. Just, I think this could do more for her. And this sort of thing as well. So I like Brandon's actually quite a bit. But if he was applying for design work and I'm reading over here, I'm going to see this side job of installing vehicle racks first. You got to think through if someone only reads your first thing, maybe they should, maybe that should be over here. They're both presently being done, so maybe flip them. Same sort of thing. If he's applying for more freelance work, does he really even need this on his resume? If he's applying to a full-time job that's more in this area of installing racks, does he need this sort of resume? Because someone's going to be like, ooh, do you just want to design stuff or do you want to install racks? So thinking about your audience. And then down here, I just don't love can use because that sounds like the bare minimum. Again, if you don't want to talk about it, don't put it on your resume. And I just think using is the bare minimum. So that's just a minor thing. I'd be like, can use software? Is there any other label we can give this? And also a pencil and paper, like, okay, congrats. Just a little weird. But looks wise, I like it overall. So, and I think I have one more set here. So actually starting over with Dana's with the teal. This one I do like and how he or she has divided sort of the software and then those bigger picture skills, art skills, design skills. I think that's really nice, but it does get a little confusing. Like these are bars of how well you know something. So again, not including too many things that you're not comfortable talking about. This might be the point where you're like, I don't want to talk about Final Cut Pro, so I'm not going to include it. But then it does get a little confusing. Like these look more like a space visual thing, not how much they know something. So thinking about if you do bars, you might be communicating something different. And over here, I really would like, I like Jordan's, but
Unknown participant is now exiting.
But I would really like to see these highlights here paired with those actual jobs and positions. It can be a little hard when things are out here to know where you gained them, and employers really kind of want to know what you were doing at each job. It's a minor thing, and you can see here there's sort of that software skills and then those bigger picture design marketing skills over here. I just always think through, especially because it's starting to get a bit of a long list. What is the most important? If they only read the top 4 and the first 4 over here, are they getting the most important things? So those are some things to think about. Let's see. Okay. What sort of questions do you all have? Okay, while you're thinking and or typing, if you thought this went really well tonight, there's more. Don't wait. Just wait. Tomorrow night we're doing a panel called "You've Got a Job Now What." It's basically, what is working in the real world like. You can find it in Connect. We're using a different platform. We're using Zoom. So hopefully that one will not drop us all mid-call because that would be really frustrating. So you can find it in Connect. It's going to be promoted on social media, the School of Art and Design. It's on Career Services social media as well. And then on Wednesday, we're doing a panel about building a freelance career. So those are both going to be really good. They're going to be in Zoom. My last tip is visit Career Services virtually or in person, whenever that happens again. We are a really good resource for you. We love to help. And so I hope I can talk to everyone later. Have a good evening and feel free to shoot me an email if you think of a question.